So, you know, fuck, innit? Big doo-doo. Big doo-doo. The new European Copyright Directive, which includes such articles as 13 and 11, has passed the European Parliament. I saw it live, and I screamed for like half an hour. Some people have been claiming that it passed by only a 5-vote margin. This is not true. The EU CD proper passed by a 74-vote margin. However, there was a last-minute proposal to consider amendments, and that failed by 5 votes. If it had been approved, each article could have been voted for independently, and so they could have passed the package of the law without Articles 11 and 13. But as it turns out, a bunch of people, 12 to be exact, wanted to vote to make it so amendments could be considered, but pressed the wrong button. They have corrected the record, but their original votes still count. But before you get angry at these idiot politicians who can't even press the right button, let me show you something.
The Buzek Report, Internal Market for Electricity, Provisional Agreement, Amendment 187, roll call vote.
Voto è chiuso.
The vote is closed. The text is approved. The Commission Statement 188. Who's in favour? Who's against? Abstentions? Approved. First reading in Parliament is now concluded. The Pedersen Report. European Union Agency for the Cooperation of Energy Regulators. A Provisional Agreement. Amendment 91. Roll call vote. The vote is closed. Approved. Congratulations to the rapporteur. First reading of Parliament is now concluded. Zanonato, risk preparedness in the electricity sector. Provisional Agreement Amendment 63. Roll call vote. The vote is closed. The text is approved. First reading for the Parliament is now closed. Congratulations to Mr. Zanonato.
EU plenary voting sessions are some rapid-fire shit. They do dozens of proposals in just a few minutes and have various different methods of voting. This is why MEPs, they know what they're going to vote for because they've read the laws in advance, so they look at which votes are going to happen in which order and have a sheet of paper and they write down the order in which they want to vote yes or no, and then they do that. This is how you avoid accidentally getting confused and voting for the wrong thing. All you have to do is not really think because you've already done all your thinking ahead of time and just go down the list that you've prepared. Unless, of course, somebody switches the voting order at the last moment and doesn't tell anyone. And that's exactly what happened. Now, it could also be that many of these MEPs actually are in favor of Article 13, wanted it to pass because of that sweet lobby cash, but they also want to have a wave of that popular support of not having voted in favor of that. And the reality is probably both of these things. So what happens next? Well, first things first, the vote by the European Parliament will in a few days be presented to the European Council, which is the heads of state of all the EU member states. Now, the Council has already voted in favor of all this during the trilogue negotiations, where the vote was to send that shit to Parliament. And then if they vote on it again now and they say yes, it will have to be implemented by each member state by 2021. This has to happen in the country's own legislative process. They have some liberty in how they interpret how harsh the directive is going to be. Like, for instance, France probably is going to be ultra draconian about this, and Sweden, which is, I think, the only country that completely voted against Article 13, and I mean the whole package as such, will probably not have a very draconian law. They will try to be very lax about it. A few countries are going to miss the deadline. That's just a thing that happens. It's happened with many other directives in the past. The EU generally doesn't care so long as they see that something is happening. But Burger, you said that Merkel can stop this. What the fuck do you mean? How is that? Yes, actually, Angela Merkel herself can stop the EU CD and thereby Articles 13 and 11. Because here's the thing, for a vote to pass the European Council, it needs to have two majorities. First of all, 55% of all the member states need to be in favor of it, and the member states that are in favor of it need to constitute 65% of the population of the EU. And guess which country has the most population in the EU? But why would Merkel do this? I mean, she is Merkel. Well, yes, and also no. I'll take you on a ride through some incredible intra-party politics and hypocrisy. It's gonna be wild. So Merkel's political party is known as the CDU, which means Christian Democratic Union, or CSU in Bavaria, with CSU meaning Christian Social Union. Even though the CSU tends to be the more conservative of the two, people don't really make the distinction because the CSU only exists in Bavaria and the CDU does not exist in Bavaria, so on a federal level they always run together. They're both conservative centrists, there's little practical difference between the parties, they are founded as sister parties, and they are currently the largest party in Germany, they are the governing party in Germany, and they have been for many years. They also run for the European Parliament, and this guy, who was the original big proponent of the new EU Copyright Directive, who later got promoted to the Commission, and this guy who has been the big-time architect, standard bearer, and really the flagship of Article 13 throughout the time during which it was passed, are both CDU. Also, all CDU MEPs except for this hero voted in favor of Article 13 this vote. However, the CDU is not governing alone. They are in a coalition, a great coalition as it is called because it's the two biggest parties in Germany, with the SPD, who are the Social Democrats of Germany, who are also generally have been considered to be a bit of a joke over the past, a very long time. They tend to parrot working class slogans, have support from the middle class, but ultimately always vote with the lobby. And ever since this human waste of space has taken over from this astroturfing alcoholic, they've gotten even worse. If you don't come from a country where there's a parliamentary system, which I think is the case for most of my viewers, here's how it works. When two parties come together to form a coalition that will constitute a majority government, they usually make a coalition treaty to make sure that ahead of time that the interests of each party, the majority party and the minority party, are considered. And the coalition treaty for the current German government between CDU and SPD explicitly states that there shall be no upload filters on the internet. Now, in the vote that happened last year, where everyone said, oh, Article 13 is passed, but it hadn't actually, it was just approved for triloguing, most of the SPD delegates to the European Parliament voted in favor of it. But, in recent weeks, there have been protests all over Europe, and especially in Germany, where, in all major and many minor cities, around 200,000 people went out onto the street. And in terms of protesting numbers, that's pretty fucking huge. The SPD seems to have caught wind of the fact that people don't really like this Article 13 thing, and so all of their MEPs, with the exception of this stupid cunt, voted against it this time around. This was ultimately the thing that made it so most of the German members of the European Parliament voted against the EU CD. This nice infographic that you have in front of my face right now, is proportionally how the individual MEPs from the states voted. In addition to this, the German Federal Minister for Justice and Consumer Protection has advised Merkel to take a stance against Article 13, even though she kind of herself also supports Article 13, but on a European level, but also it's a problem on account of the SPD's a fucking joke. But wait! There's more! One of the main slogans during the protests was Nie mehr CDU, which means never again CDU. And just to sort of reiterate what a bunch of cunts the CDU are, this arsehole right here claimed that all the emails sent to MEPs that said, oh no, we don't want the Article 13 because that's what you're supposed to do. If you have a problem, call your congressperson. No, they were all sent by Google bots. And this even bigger arsehole, in the wake of the protest, claimed that the protesters were bought and paid for by Google. Both of these men are members of the European Parliament for the CDU. But unlike those cunts, the CDU here in Germany does not sit far away in Strasbourg and Brussels from time to time. They actually saw the protests. And they kind of got cold feet. They thought, maybe if we sort of destroy the way of life of all of these young people for the print lobby, maybe they won't like us very much. The CDU in Schleswig-Holstein, where I live, has officially said, oh no, members of European Parliament, colleagues of our party, vote against this is a bad law. But then again, they are quite more on the left-leaning side of the party at large in terms of the federal level. And on the federal level, the CDU has sort of proposed to introduce legislation that would sort of exempt Germany from the filters that would be implemented, like from the copyright directive as a whole and all the bad parts. Obviously that wouldn't work. We would get the shit fined out of us from the Commission, which the Commission has already made clear that they're going to do that. And also it would be a massive fuck you to all of the other people in the European Union. You can't have all this talk about, well, we need to be Europeans, we need to consider the interests of the other European states and do all this together, and then do something on your own in this way. All this does, however, show that the CDU is scared shitless. They're not, however, scared shitless enough to really reinforce upon their colleagues in the European Parliament to vote against this. So, you know, one might think that maybe they actually kind of do support Article 13 because of those sweet lobby bucks. And maybe they're just telling the voters that they're against it. But I mean, that would be lying, and it's not like any politician has ever lied, ever. I mean, it is true that this particular cunt of the CSU in the European Parliament tried to pull ahead the vote on the EUCD to beat the protests, but he denied it. I mean, sure, official documentation proves that he's lying, but if he says he isn't lying, can we really assume that he is lying? So this is why Merkel, if she wanted to, would in theory have the political capital to crash Article 13 in the European Council, and then it would be dead for good. However, she has always been a staunch supporter of it. Because of course! You could easily get around the clause in the coalition treaty by claiming, well, it doesn't actually dictate upload filters, which is the same excuse they used Axel Voss used it in the European Parliament. Said, oh, it doesn't mandate upload filters, it's just the only way that this could possibly be done. Merkel, who, two fun facts that I always like to tell this to people about Merkel, she has a PhD in physics, and she's afraid of large dogs because she got mauled by one when she was a kid. And Merkel does not have to worry about being re-elected because she's retiring. Whatever mess she leaves behind, this half pint will have to deal with. And yes, for the benefit of our international viewers, I will say her name, Annegret Kramp-Karrenbauer, which Germans also think that's a bit much. So there's no way of actually definitively knowing how she's gonna vote on this. But I'm not getting my hopes up. Because here's a big factor. Originally, during the trilogue negotiations for Article 13, Germany wanted exceptions for tech startups. But France really didn't want that, because France in this whole thing have been the biggest cunts of all. And Germany eventually conceded this exception for startups and said, okay, we don't want it anymore. And it turns out, we found out recently, because all these trilogue negotiations happened behind closed doors, because that's what you do, that they conceded this because France, Macron said, hey, if you concede it, we will support your new Russian gas pipeline that we've been going against. That's a real thing that happened in real life recently, not in some historical documents, and not in a fictional work. That is actually something that happened. But there is another female leader of a country that is currently in the EU that could stop this. And it's an unlikely candidate. It's someone you would never have expected. I am of course talking about Theresa May. If she withdraws the United Kingdom's support for the EUCD in the European Council, it would crash for the exact same reasons it would crash if Merkel did that. Interestingly enough though, despite condemning Article 13 as being evil EU tyranny, most of the Tory MEPs voted in favour of it. To their credit, almost all of the MEPs of like the Brexit and UKIP wings of all the British MEPs voted against it, though in the thing that passed by like 5 votes only and that could have gone the other way around easily, In that one, a lot of them abstained for some reason, like for instance Farage himself. But what if it goes through the council? Well, at that point it can't really be blocked anymore, but there is still hope even then. And that hope comes in the form of EU courts. Because here's the thing. Upload filters that monitor for copyrighted material are illegal under standing European law. And the European Court of Justice has upheld this against governments and EU initiatives to make upload filters a thing in the past. And remember, the EUCD does not legalize upload filters. It doesn't make any mention of upload filters because they were such a contentious issue. So we might get into a very interesting situation where the upload filters, which are the most contentious aspect of this whole legislation, are required to make it happen, but also they're not allowed. These are questions that legal experts and courts will be battling about for years to come. And I am, for one, very happy that that's going to be the case, because that's why we have courts. So yeah, there's still hope that Article 13 won't be a thing. Just not a lot of it. Thank you very much for watching. Like, comment, subscribe, post this video to your relevant communités, but do not spam them, please. Consider supporting me on Patreon or now Subscribestar. They finally come through and activated my Subscribestar account. So I know a lot of people said, oh, I don't want to support you on Patreon anymore a couple months ago when they banned Sargon, which I totally understand. And they've been waiting for an alternative method to support me. Well, there it is. Subscribestar is now open. And in that spirit, don't lose hope. Like, lose most hope, most of the hope you can sort of get rid of. But like, keep a little bit, because you should. It's objectively, you should do that. And see you around, cunts.